Welcome, part 3 of our journey through the book of Revelation. And as a sort of subtitle for this entire part together, I've entitled it The Real Life World of the Book of Revelation. And what we want to do in the next few episodes is cover a little bit of ground in terms of what the situation or the circumstances would have been like for the first hearers or readers, the first audiences for this apocalypse that we now call Revelation. One of the things that's crucial for interpretation of any New Testament passage, and for many of the Old Testament passages as well, is to at least do our best to try to answer the question of what was the occasion that triggered or that generated an author's desire to create a particular text to send to an audience. We can't always be successful. There are some biblical texts where we don't know who the author is, or there may be a plurality of authors. There are some biblical texts where we don't know the exact geographic or even the precise historic location of a particular audience or a particular author. In this particular case, however, with the book of Revelation, we can be pretty specific about the time, the setting, the historical context for the material that we find in the book of Revelation. One of the things that context helps us to eliminate when we can determine it is what a text could not mean. And because we can be as specific as we can be with Revelation, one of the things that's really important to remember is that some of the familiar futuristic interpretations of Revelation in our own time today simply would have been utterly unrecognizable and foreign to the first audience. And one of the rules of interpretation that we want to try to follow in this discussion is that whatever a text may mean for us today, it had to have relevance and meaning that's consistent with that in its original setting, as much as we can determine that. So for any reading of the book of Revelation, especially the one that I talked about a little bit earlier on and gave the futuristic label, where essentially the entirety of chapters 4 to 22 are projected not only into the future, but into the future of current readers today. That kind of reading of Revelation just makes no sense to an original audience. The author repeatedly exhorts his audience, his hearers and readers, to respond to many of the items in the material that we find in those last 18 or 19 chapters of Revelation. So it seems illogical to think that this is all a futuristic prediction. Rather, I think it's important for us to locate as well as we can what it is the author was saying to a given time and a given place. In very broad terms, we know that the author's name was John. He self-identifies that way. I have already mentioned in a previous episode, not everybody agrees on who that John is, but I think the important point to remember in our reading of the text is that this author knew his audience and they knew him very well. So there's a familiarity in the narrative itself of the book of Revelation. In terms of the time or the date when this document was authored, there are several theories. Two are the most common. Scholars either tend to date the book of Revelation in the late 60s, right near the end of the reign of the Emperor Nero. More scholars date Revelation in the mid-90s, near the end of the reign of the Emperor Domitian. And that's the view that I will take in this particular course on Revelation. I think some of the dynamics around Domitian's reign in first century Asia Minor really make sense for what we find in the text, but it is also very possible, perhaps even likely, that some of the material in Revelation was material that this author had been reflecting on and developing, and perhaps it had been evolving over many years and even decades. If you're familiar with the work that pastors, teachers, preachers, even teachers in schools do, you'll know that they often have a familiar